Hi everybody and welcome to today's video. We're going to be looking at Act 2, Scene 1 of Othello, up until about line 211, I think it is, depending on your version of the play. So make sure you're taking notes as you're watching, pause the video, jot things down as they occur to you. And I hope you find this really helpful in studying the play. So in terms of looking at this play, I'm always trying to get you to consider the big questions and then to use the finer detail of the play to support those big ideas. And today's big question is, what is the nature of Othello's love for Desdemona? That's what we're going to be thinking about as we look through the scene, because it's very easy to think about love at first sight as being a very kind of transparent, very obvious, very easily understood idea, but actually Othello's feelings for Desdemona are a little bit more complicated than that. So in terms of where we are in the play, what's happened so far is in Act 1, Scene 1, Othello has eloped with Desdemona. Iago and Rodrigo have woken Brabantio up, told him about the elopement. Brabantio has been absolutely furious, and he's gone to the Duke to try and get the marriage stopped. The Duke has allowed the marriage to go ahead because, and only because, Othello is so important for securing the stability of the Venetian state. So Othello leads the army and he's the best leader that they have. So the Duke allows the marriage to go ahead and everybody jumps on boats and sails off to Cyprus to try and beat the Turkish fleet and to secure Cyprus, the Venetian garrison that's on Cyprus. Now, what happens between the end of Act 1 and the start of Act 2 is that there's an incredibly massive storm, which fortunately destroys the Turkish fleet. But it doesn't destroy the Venetian fleet. And so in this scene, we see the different ships arriving on Cyprus and the people gathering together to start to celebrate the winning of the battle against, well, they didn't have a battle because the storm did that, but the winning of the combat against Turkey. Now, different ships arrive first, so Cassio arrives first, then Iago, Desdemona and Emilia arrive, and then after that, Othello arrives. So let's look then at the conversations that they have. And we open the scene with different gentlemen discussing the storm, discussing what's happened. And so the second gentleman says that there's been a segregation, a dispersal, a disruption of the Turkish fleet. For do but stand upon the foaming shore, the chidden blow seems to pelt the clouds. The wind-shaked surge, with high and monstrous mane, seems to cast water on the burning bear, and quench the guards of th' ever-fired pole. I never did like molestation view on the enchafed flood. So what the gentleman is saying is that the Turkish fleet has been disrupted, it's being very badly hurt by the storm, and he's describing the sheer force and power of the storm, the chidden billow, so the force of the waves and the wind is incredible. There's a monstrous mane, so he's personifying the sea there and describing how incredibly powerful the sea is. And Montano replies, if that the Turkish fleet be not ensheltered and embayed, they are drowned. It is impossible to bear it out. So Montano thinks no one could have survived this storm. Okay, but Montano's been lucky, he's got to Cyprus. So if we have a little look at the language that the gentleman is using, as I've said, he's emphasising the sheer power of the storm. But the word monstrous is really interesting here. Now, throughout the play, we see the motif of monstrousness being used, and here it's applied to the storm. Later on, Othello describes Desdemona's infidelity as being monstrous. By the end of the play, it's Othello and Iago who are the monsters because they have committed the murders. So this idea of monstrousness is seeded here, and it seems to grow throughout the rest of the play. Similarly, the storm seems to plant the seed of chaos at this point of the play. And again, that fills the whole rest of the play. So we have a turning point here where we move from the relative stability of Act 1 into the descent into complete chaos. And that chaos seems to come from the natural world, first of all. And then Cassio talks about this warlike isle, and then he says he hopes that Othello is given defence against the elements, for he's lost him on the dangerous sea. So Cassio has arrived, but he's worried that Othello isn't going to be able to survive the storm. So we've got a bit of fear here for a tragic hero. And if we look at how Cassio describes Cyprus here, again, this foreshadows the chaos, the disruption, the conflict that's going to take place in the personal realm later on in the play. So he describes Cyprus as being a warlike isle. Now, Cassio means that it's a military garrison, it's constantly being fought over by different countries, Turkey wants to claim it and so on, and Venice wants to maintain their power there. So in the political world, there is war involved on this island. But what we see later in the play is that this context of kind of confusion, war, conflict seems to seep into the personal relationships between the characters. And so the war that we see later on in the play is actually between Othello and Desdemona, and Iago and the other characters as well. So this warlike isle is a really useful quotation to note down and remember, because it's quite a good description of the relationships between the characters later on. Now, what's all of this got to do with our big question, the nature of Othello's love for Desdemona? Well, that love becomes monstrous. Iago makes it monstrous. It becomes as chaotic as the storm. It becomes warlike. So all of these words that the characters here are using to describe the setting and the storm are later applied to the relationship between Othello and Desdemona. So we've got a great level of foreshadowing here. And also, because it's a tragedy, of course, we have this sense of the inevitability of the decline in the relationship between Othello and his new wife. So then Cassio starts to describe Desdemona, and Cassio he's from Florence, he's very elegantly spoken, he's very courteous, he's very chivalrous, and that's probably all there is to the way that he describes Desdemona here. He describes her as being divine, she's heavenly. But Iago takes the way that Cassio very openly describes Desdemona with this great level of admiration, and he twists it, and he starts to make it appear as if Cassio is actually in love with Desdemona, when probably all he's doing is being very chivalrous and very courteous, and celebrating the new wife. Then, interestingly, he says, our great captain's captain. So he's talking about Othello here. Our great captain is Othello, but the captain, the leader, the person who's in control of Othello is Desdemona. That's what Cassio means here. And this is one of the things that Iago cannot stand. He absolutely cannot stand a woman having any kind of agency or power or control. And it's possibly one of the reasons why Iago then goes on to cause Desdemona and Othello's downfall. So again, these are really important quotations that you should learn. Our great captain's captain is a useful one because you can juxtapose it, you can contrast it with the end of the play so easily. And then after that, Iago, Desdemona, Emilia arrive on the island, their ship comes in, and they start to have a bit of kind of witty banter as they wait for Othello. Now, this should be funny. You might not find it as a modern viewer, but it should be quite funny. So Iago is complaining about his wife Emilia, and he says, "Sir, she would give you so much of her lips as of her tongue she oft bestows on me. You'd have enough." So what Iago is saying is that Emilia is bad-tempered and she tells him off all the time. Of course, there's probably a little bit of innuendo going on here as well with the lips and the tongue. And then Desdemona says, "Alas, she has no speech." Emilia is standing there on the stage quietly listening to her husband verbally abuse her in front of other people. And whilst it's kind of in fun, it's also not, because we come to learn throughout the play that Iago manipulates and controls and dominates Emilia, and Emilia just has to stand there and take it because she's living in a patriarchal society. Desdemona joins in with Iago here and says she has no speech, so she starts on Emilia as well. And I find this section of the play really difficult because you want Desdemona to stand up for Emilia in the way that Emilia does for Desdemona at the end of the play, but Desdemona doesn't do it here. And it's interesting to see how separated, how difficult the relationship between Desdemona and Emilia is here at the start of the play, because that completely transforms by Act 4, Scene 3, the willow scene. So then Iago continues with this kind of witty banter. "In faith too much, I find it still when I have list asleep. Marry before your ladyship I grant, she puts her tongue a little in her heart and chides with thinking." So even in her thinking, Emilia is bad-tempered and tells her husband off. And Emilia replies, she does speak here, "You have little cause to say so." So she denies that she's this kind of bad-tempered, shrewish wife. We have no evidence anywhere in the play to back up what Iago says about Emilia here. We have no evidence that she tells him off, that she's grumpy, that she's bad-tempered. And so actually, I love the character of Emilia, and I'm very much on her side at this point in the play. I think she's being badly treated. And then Iago starts to talk more generally about women, and he says, come on, your picture's out of doors, so you look perfect when you go outside. You know, you put your makeup on, you dress up, whatever, and you look beautiful outside. Your bells in your parlours, your wildcats in your kitchens. Notice the animalistic language there. Your saints in your injuries, devils being offended, players in your housewifery, and housewives in your bed. So it takes quite a sexual turn. But through all of this, Iago's being quite dismissive, quite misogynistic towards women. But it's supposed to be a joke. But the clever thing about Iago is that when he's joking, he's actually telling the truth. Other people just can't tell that. And Desdemona says, "Oh, fie upon thee, slanderer." So it's quite interesting that in that section, Desdemona is very outspoken, she's very confident, she's engaging in this witty banter, and she's clearly enjoying the freedom that she's got from being sequestered, from being hidden away at her home in Venice. Then Cassio starts to talk to Desdemona, and Iago, in an aside, describes what he sees. So he sees Cassio takes her by the palm, "I well said, whisper. With as little a web as this will I ensnare as great a fly as Cassio." So Cassio has come over to Desdemona, he's welcoming her to the island, he takes her hand, and Iago looks at this and says, this is it. Cassio is too kind, he's too courteous, he's too chivalrous towards Desdemona. I'm going to make it look as if they're having an affair. So then Iago says, "Smile upon her, do. I will jive thee in thine own courtesies. You say true, 'tis so indeed. If such tricks as these strip you out of your lieutenantry." So he plans to cause Cassio's downfall as well. "It had been better had you not kissed your 3 fingers so oft, which now again you are most apt to play the sir in. Very good, well kissed, and excellent courtesy, 'tis so indeed. Yet your fingers to your lips, would they wear clyster pipes for your sake?" So Iago is commenting on how Cassio is speaking to Desdemona, and he's saying that it's a little bit too far, it's a bit improper, and everybody around can see how much Cassio likes Desdemona at this point. Now we know that Cassio is not going too far. Other people are persuaded by Iago that he does go too far. And that section at the end of Iago's aside shows his really debased attitude towards women and towards kind of sexual relationships, because it's quite a clear euphemism there that Iago says at the end. Now, another really important quotation to think about here is this one: "With as little a web as this, I will ensnare as great a fly as Cassio." So we have an image here of Iago as a spider, with all of the kind of uncomfortable connotations that has. And Iago is going to weave this Machiavellian web around these people. So you can imagine a spider capturing a fly and gradually wrapping it around. I'm thinking of that scene in Lord of the Rings where Shelob ensnares Frodo, and Frodo's absolutely covered in the web, and the panic that he feels. So this is how Iago sees himself, as this spider who's in control. And his plan is to cause Cassio's downfall, and that of Desdemona and Othello as well, of course. So then, after that, Othello arrives, and he greets Desdemona and says, "Oh, my fair warrior." Interesting phrase, isn't it? He thinks that she's beautiful, she's fair, also that she's a warrior. I mean, quite obviously she's got on the ship to go out to war, but it's interesting that he sees her as being quite a powerful, independent woman at this point. And Desdemona says, "My dear Othello." Now, this is a bit of a change in Desdemona at this part of the scene. Previously, she's been very outspoken, very forthright. She's been jesting bodily with Iago. She's been speaking a lot. As soon as Othello arrives, she doesn't do that. Now, going back to this question of what is the nature of Othello's love for Desdemona, we've got to ask ourselves, does he really know his wife? In their initial meetings, he's spoken a lot and she's listened. And we've just seen that actually Desdemona can speak a lot, that she can hold her own in conversation in public, but here she doesn't. So Othello doesn't really see her in that context, he sees her as someone who's going to be quite quiet, who's going to listen to him speak, who's going to listen to him say how much he loves her, all of that. But he doesn't see her as a woman with her own mind and independence and determination, which is a problem, because maybe Othello doesn't actually know his wife as well as he thinks he does. And perhaps this is part of the foundations of the downfall of their marriage. So then Othello is the one who speaks here. And he says, "It gives me wonder great as my content to see you here before me. Oh, my soul's joy! If after every tempest, if after every storm came such calms, may the winds blow until they have wakened death, and let the labouring bark climb hills of seas Olympus high, and duck again as low as hell's from heaven. If it were nigh to die, 'twere nigh to be most happy. For I fear my soul hath her content so absolute, that not another comfort like to this succeeds an unknown fate." So let's pick this apart a little bit. Othello says, "My soul's joy." This is a moment of transcendental love. You know, this love transports Othello from the material, from the physical realm, up into this kind of heavenly state. And he's talking about souls here. Later on in the play, Othello talks about toads having sex in cisterns, and so that's a very debased image of love. Whereas here, there's no physical element to it at all. He sees his relationship with Desdemona as eternal, as being one of emotion and psychological connection, rather than having any kind of physical element to it. So again, this is an important quotation because it changes so much by the end of the play. And then I do wonder if Othello knows what he's saying here. He says, "If after every storm there's such a calm, then I wish there were lots of storms." That's a bit odd, isn't it? So what's going to happen is there's going to be a huge metaphorical storm in the play, where Othello and Desdemona's marriage is tested in the extreme. But the calm doesn't come after that storm. But it's almost here as if Othello's wishing that there's going to be another storm, just so that he can experience the joy after the storm. He doesn't realise what he's wishing on himself here. And then again, if it were nigh to die, 'twere nigh to be most happy. If I died now, I would be incredibly happy. For I feel my soul hath her content so absolute, that not another comfort like to this succeeds. So he's afraid that he's so happy now that he's never going to have a moment like this again. Now that's important, because this is the pinnacle of Othello's happiness. Everything from here goes downhill. So again, does Othello know what he's saying? He's saying, actually, it'd be a good thing to die now, so that I don't know the difficulties that might come later on. So the nature of Othello's love for Desdemona is perhaps not understood by Othello himself. He doesn't realise that he doesn't really know his wife. He doesn't realise that reducing their love to something kind of ephemeral that's just about the soul without the physical aspect of it isn't a complete idea of love. And he doesn't realise that he's almost wishing bad things to happen in their marriage later on in the play. So it's quite a significant section at this point in Act 2, Scene 1. And then Iago, aside, speaking to the audience, says, "Oh, you're well tuned now, but I'll set down the pegs that make this music, as honest as I am." Now, I don't know if you play any stringed instruments, but if you see a guitar or a violin and you see the musicians tuning these, you'll know that what they do is that there's pegs at the top and that the musicians will turn the pegs. And as those pegs turn, they tighten the string and they put it in tune. Now, the metaphor that Iago's using here is that he's going to turn the pegs the wrong way. So he's going to put that instrument completely out of tune. So it's not going to be harmonious, but it's going to be disharmonious. And so we have this really useful metaphor, actually, for what Iago is planning to do later in the play. He's planning to get rid of harmony, get rid of any sense of order, and plunge everybody into disharmony and chaos. And this metaphor of music appears later on in the play as well. And of course, we've got the dramatic irony here when Iago says that he's honest, and we know that he's not honest. Okay, so if you want, here's a little independent learning task. I'd like you to go back through the scene and look for any quotations used to describe Desdemona and separate them into two categories. So where do the characters show that they admire Desdemona, and where do the characters show that they have a debased attitude or a controlling attitude to Desdemona? And look at the balance of these, and maybe there might be some surprises in there. So thank you very much, and the next video is going to be on the next section of this scene.